Rare lioness gives birth. Minutes after Ranger arrives, miracle happens. The low, rhythmic panting echoed from beneath the ancient acacia tree, a sound that immediately caught Ranger Sarah Mitchell's attention as she conducted her evening patrol. Through the Serengeti's northern corridor, the young lioness lay pressed against the massive trunk, her golden flanks rising and falling with the distinctive breathing pattern that Sarah had learned to recognize after 8 years of wildlife conservation work. This was not the normal rest of a healthy predator, but the labored respiration of an animal in the early stages of labor. Isolated from her pride and facing one of nature's most vulnerable moments alone, Sarah parked her Land Rover at a respectful distance, understanding that approaching too closely could cause the lioness to abandon this location and seek another birthing site that might be far less suitable. Through her binoculars, she could see that the great cat was young, probably experiencing her first pregnancy, which explained both her isolation from the main pride and the visible signs of distress that marked her body language. The lioness shifted position frequently, unable to find comfort, as contractions began to establish the rhythm that would eventually bring new life into the harsh beauty of the African savanna. The timing concerned Sarah more than she wanted to admit. Lions typically gave birth during the dry season when prey was concentrated around permanent water sources. But recent climate patterns had disrupted traditional cycles, forcing wildlife to adapt to conditions that challenged even the most resilient species. This lioness had chosen her birthing spot. Wealthy acacia provided shelter from both the afternoon sun and potential aerial predators, while the elevated position offered good sightlines across the surrounding grassland where danger might approach. Yet something about the lioness's behavior suggested complications that went beyond normal first birth anxiety. Her movements were more restless than purposeful, and occasionally she would pause mid-pant to look toward her own flank with what appeared to be confusion or concern. Sarah had witnessed enough animal births to recognize when instinct alone might not be sufficient to guide a young mother through the process that should have been as natural as breathing. The isolation itself told a story that Sarah could read in the lioness's body language and the absence of other pride members in the immediate area. Young females sometimes left the group to give birth, seeking privacy and protection for vulnerable newborns, but they usually remained within calling distance of their family unit. This lioness appeared to be truly alone, perhaps driven away by a dominant female or simply overwhelmed by instincts she was experiencing for the first time. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the golden grassland, Sarah made the decision to remain within sight of the struggling mother, understanding that sometimes the simple presence of another living creature could provide comfort during life's most challenging transitions. The lioness seemed aware of the human observer, but showed no signs of stress at being watched, suggesting that her focus had turned entirely inward to the ancient process that was beginning to claim her complete attention. "Take your time, beautiful girl," Sarah whispered, settling into her seat for what she sensed would be a long vigil under the African sky. The evening wind stirred the acacia's thorny branches as the lioness continued her rhythmic panting, each breath marking another step toward the miracle of birth in one of Earth's last wild places. As darkness settled over the savanna, the lioness's labor began to intensify in ways that transformed her earlier restlessness into something more focused and urgent. Sarah adjusted her position in the Land Rover to maintain visual contact while respecting the invisible boundaries that wild creatures establish around themselves during their most vulnerable moments. The great cat had stopped her frequent position changes, settling into a more purposeful stillness that suggested the deep work of birth was beginning in earnest. The lioness's breathing pattern shifted from the steady panting of early labor to something more irregular and demanding, punctuated by soft grunts that carried across the night air with surprising clarity. Sarah had witnessed enough animal births to recognize these sounds as the involuntary vocalizations that accompanied strong contractions. The body's ancient rhythm asserting itself over conscious control. Each vocalization seemed to mark another step in the process that would either bring new life into the world or claim both mother and cubs in the harsh mathematics of survival through her night vision equipment. Sarah could observe the subtle changes in the lioness's body language that spoke to the progression of events she could not directly witness. The great cat's powerful hindquarters shifted position repeatedly as she sought the optimal angle for delivery, her tail switching with increasing frequency as discomfort merged with instinctive preparation. Her amber eyes, when they caught the infrared illumination, held the distant focus of an animal whose awareness had turned completely inward. The hours passed with the particular slowness that marked all vigils where life and death balanced on invisible scales. Sarah found herself unconsciously matching her breathing to the lioness's rhythm, a strange form of solidarity between species, separated by millions of years of evolution, but united in this moment by the fundamental experience of bringing forth new life. The acacia tree stood sentinel above them both, its thorny branches creating shifting patterns of shadow and starlight that danced across the laboring mother's golden coat. Around midnight, the lioness's behavior shifted again, becoming more restless, as powerful contractions began to demand her complete attention. She rose and circled the base of the tree several times before settling into a new position, her movements guided by instincts older than human memory. Sarah could see the muscular ripples along the cat's flanks that marked each contraction, the visible evidence of forces working to bring cubs into a world that would test their survival from their very first breath. The most remarkable development was the way the lioness seemed to draw comfort from Sarah's presence rather than stress. Several times during the long night, those amber eyes found the ranger's location and rested there briefly, as if acknowledging the strange companionship that had developed between predator and human. There was no fear in that gaze, only the profound focus of a creature engaged in life's most essential work, somehow reassured by the knowledge that she was not entirely alone in the vast darkness of the African night. "You're doing beautifully, Mama," Sarah whispered into the stillness, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the laboring lioness. The great cat's ears swiveled toward the sound, and for a moment her panting slowed, as if she were listening, not just to the words, but to the compassion behind them, drawing strength from this unexpected source of support. As dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon, the first rays of dawn brought with them a shift in the lioness's behavior that sent concern rippling through Sarah's careful observations. The great cat's contractions had intensified throughout the pre-dawn hours, but her efforts seemed to be producing little visible progress toward the birth that should have been nearing completion. Sarah could see the exhaustion beginning to settle into the lioness's powerful frame, the way her movements between contractions became less purposeful and more labored as energy reserves depleted from hours of hard work. Then, as the golden light of sunrise painted the acacia's leaves, the lioness gave one final tremendous push that brought forth the first cub in a rush of fluid and membrane. Sarah held her breath as the tiny form lay motionless for several heartbeats, before the mother's rough tongue began the urgent work of cleaning and stimulating her newborn. But as the early light revealed the cub's features, Sarah felt her heart stop entirely. The tiny lion was completely white, its pale coat already showing the faint shadow of rosettes that would never darken to the typical golden brown of its species. The second cub followed within minutes, sliding into the world with the same miraculous coloring that marked it as one of nature's rarest gifts. Both cubs were leucistic, carrying the genetic variation that occurred perhaps once in 10,000 births, their pale coats complemented by eyes that would develop into the pale blue, unique to their condition. Sarah understood immediately that she was witnessing something extraordinary. A birth that wildlife researchers could spend entire careers hoping to observe. The lioness showed no confusion about her pale offspring, accepting them with the same fierce devotion she would have shown cubs of any coloring. Her rough tongue worked methodically to clean each tiny form, stimulating their breathing and circulation while soft rumbling sounds emerged from deep in her chest. The cubs responded with faint mewing calls, their voices barely audible, but carrying the unmistakable demand for warmth and nourishment that marked healthy newborns. As the morning progressed, and the cubs found their way to their mother's milk, the lioness lifted her great head and looked directly at Sarah, for the first time since labor had begun in earnest. In that amber gaze was something that transcended species boundaries, a recognition of the vigil that had been shared, a gratitude for the presence that had provided comfort during her most vulnerable hours. "Welcome to the world, little miracles," Sarah whispered, tears blurring her vision as she watched the extraordinary family settle into their first moments together. The morning wind stirred the grassland around the acacia as two white cubs nursed beneath their mother's protective gaze. Three lives forever connected by the dawn that had brought magic into an already magnificent world.